Welcome, I'm Jeanette, the North Down Coach. I'm so glad that you're here with me as we bring another career topic. I'm continuing the theme that we started last week around if you are mid to later career, perhaps you've had, a lot of success in your career, and then for whatever reason, you start to feel like, this is not working. I need to try something different. I'm really looking for a transition or a pivot. I need to get out of the current circumstances. And last week, what I suggested is hold on, that may be true. And before you take big action steps like jump into updating the resume, for instance, or resigning or something more dramatic along those lines, you want to do a little bit of work to determine, okay, what's really going on here before you make some decisions that, the circumstances may still cause you to want to make the pivot. I'm not saying that they won't. However, it's worth taking a look at it before you make some changes to see, okay, what are the nuances around this? So last week, what I suggested is do some journaling, do some noticing during the week around what are some of the things that happen where you're like, yes, I love this. This is really positive. This is fulfilling. And then what are the things that have happened where you're like, ugh, yes, absolutely. I need to get out of here last week. I need to move last week. This is not sustainable. And so once you've gone through that process, you start to see some of the patterns of it. Now what I want to suggest is let's dig into some of those negative patterns, right? With some of the negative instances, because those are the ones that you're trying to escape, right? The positive things would keep you there. But let's dive into, okay, what's going on in that negative space and see what we can find. Now, it may still point to, yes, I need to transition, I need to pivot, and we'll talk about that down the road around, okay, what comes next. And before we get there, let's really make sure that it is the kind of situation where you do need to make some sort of a bigger change. Because it could be that just a couple of tweaks internally could make all the difference. So before you completely jump into something else, let's examine that. And this week, what I want to examine are the stories that we tell ourselves about whatever situation is happening. And by stories, I don't mean like we pause and we're like, let me tell myself a story about it. No, what I'm talking about is where it feels just instantaneous. Like you don't even pause to know that you're telling yourself a story. You have the incident occur, and you gather some pieces of data associated with that, and then very quickly you associate meaning to the pieces of data that you picked up, and that meaning then causes you to feel a certain way and ultimately causes action one way or the other. There are many different stories that can be built off of that same set of data. We just don't think about it that way. And when we start to have some of the same sort of occurrences happen over and over and over again, the story that we tell ourselves is just like on rewind. Like we don't see it as a story at all. It's just more information about the same sort of thing, like digging that deeper and deeper and deeper. And what I want to offer to you is, before we get there, let's see if we can slow that down and think about, well, some alternative stories that might come from the same set of data. So, the application of this is in all sorts of situations that might occur at work. Let's say that you are presenting to your team, and you're presenting some data up on slides, and your team is around the sides of the table, and you notice while you're presenting that your colleague is looking at their phone kind of puzzled like, and then it's starting to poke around on the phone, and then the colleague next to them starts to pay attention to what they're looking at. Now, you may, if you have had like the belief, the set of stories around my colleagues are just not supportive of me, this is an awful place to work, look, they're not paying attention in this setting, what have you. You may quickly look at that situation, read the facial expressions, read the quote distraction, and come to the conclusion like, once again, my colleagues are not paying attention during my presentation, and I need to get out of here. the action that you might take. What's an alternative version of that story? What if your colleagues were seeing something in what you were presenting and had a question about it and were going back to reference something in their information from their phone that they might have wanted to ask a really helpful follow-up question around to support you, right? To make it better, not to be distracted and not be paying attention and not being supportive. If that were true, that would cause a different sort of a story to be told. My colleagues actually do have my back. They do support me. They're trying to make me better. And you could ask the action instead of like the extreme, like my colleagues are not supportive, might be, let me ask like what if there was a question, right? And then that story could be validated. Now, the first story could be the actual representation of what's going on. I'm not saying that it isn't. However, what I am saying is it makes for a better strategic plan for yourself and what you do in your next steps of your career to get the most accurate representation of what really is going on before making those changes. So what I'd like to suggest as a follow-up for this week is go back to your journaling from last week, or if you haven't done the journaling, start it for this week. And then in those negative sides of things, think about what made them negative and what story you might have been telling yourself associated with them. And then what's an alternative story that also might work with the set of facts that were in the situation that could drive a very different conclusion. And then what would that mean for your question around pivoting or transitioning? Maybe it's something else that could be done internally that wouldn't have caused the need to make that big change. If you would like a thought partner on this, I'd be happy to offer you a free 45-minute strategy session. I can't speak. A free 45-minute strategy session together. I'll put the link to schedule that in the description box. No strings attached. I'm happy to meet with you around that. All right, that's it for this week. I will see you in another week and have a good one. Thanks for joining me. Take care.